Hello, Royalers. Thank you for taking some time out of your schedule today for today's lecture. I think you're really going to enjoy it. I think we can all remember where we were when we saw the movie What's Love Got to Do with It with Ike and Tina Turner. Today's couple that we're going to talk about, their life really paralleled them a lot. They were both stars. She was driven and destined for greatness, whereas the husband, he had a lot of problems. I thought you'd find this really interesting. So thank you for joining me. Don't forget to hit like, share, and subscribe. It really moves the video through the algorithm so that others can hear about the royal black and elite. And there is no doubt that Miss Cicely Tyson and Miles Davis is amongst the greatest royals in the entertainment industry. Now, Cicely Tyson's name has always been clean. We have known her as a grandmother, a mother, an aunt, a sister. She's been in every black movie since black movies started being made, it seems like. We've never seen her as a young woman, but she was indeed young. In fact, she was born in the Bronx, New York, on December the 19th, 1924. She had two other siblings, and her father's name was William, and her mother's name was Frederica. Now, they grew up in East Harlem, but her parents were actually immigrants from the West Indies. Now, by the time Cicely was 18, she was married, and people married early back in those days. So she married on December the 27th, 1942, to a guy named Kenneth Franklin. Now, Kenneth, he had a little bit of problem. They had a baby a year later, a girl, so she had one daughter, but Kenneth didn't want to play house. In fact, he walked out on the family, just abandoned Cicely only 2 years into the marriage. Now she stayed married with him until 1950 or to him until 1956. And we find that's what happens. You can meet people back in the olden days, they were divorced or separated and they were not living together, but they were still married. Maybe it was the money or maybe I don't know, the benefits, I don't know, but they did not get a lot of times did not get divorced for a long time. Did you ever know anybody like that? Well, this is how Cicely was with her first husband. So she divorced him in 1956. And I think really, too, that's when she really got her independence. In fact, in her memoir, she said that she was a secretary and she was typing. And in that moment, she realized that there had to be more for her. And maybe also because she had been discovered by a photographer from Ebony magazine, and she went on to start modeling. Now, she became big and started getting famous. And so in 1961, Hollywood came knocking. And she acted in her first show called Frontiers of Faith. By 1966, she was living in New York and her career was blowing up. In fact, she was on a soap opera called Guiding Light. Now, this is when she met Mr. Miles Davis. They was living in New York, both of them. He was famous, she was famous, and they were living somewhat in the same neighborhood. I believe it was love at first sight. Now, in both of their memoirs, they both wrote one, and respectively, they both said one, she felt when she first saw him, his blackness struck her. She loved him from the moment she met him. Whereas for him, he said it was her afro and her strength. And they really stayed in each other's life until his passing. But it was really tumultuous. See, she dated Paul Whitfield on and off, and Miles was married at the time, but Miles was her thing. After him, there was no other man, at least not in the public. Now, there was only one problem when they met. Miles was married, very much so. His wife was named Frances Taylor, and she was a dancer. But they were having problems also. You see, Frances reported in her divorce that Miles had a little alcohol problem, and he also liked the substances, and he liked to put his hands on her very often. And even one time she reported he was running around the house with a sticky thing. So I think she was over it. And he was a cheater. So much so that he actually put Cicely's photo on his cover of his album Sorcerer. So the relationship was clearly over. So Cicely, after going, being in that relationship for a couple of years, it was 68. They were getting their divorce, and Miles assured her once they got divorced, he was going to marry her. But instead of marrying her, what he did is he married another woman, a 20-year-old named Betty Maybrith. Now, Betty kind of favored his first wife, in my opinion, but that's who he married, and he was still up to no good. But do you know, only 2 years later, he divorced Betty because he said that she was cheating with Jimi Hendrix. So that's kind of where things were at that point. A hot mess, and they got a divorce. Now, the same year he was cheating with Betty. Now, I know he had a lot of women, y'all. It's hard to keep up. He was cheating with Betty, but he was pop out 5 times while sitting in his Ferrari. Now, he was sitting in the car with a lady named Marguerite, and she later went on to have his son, but he was still cheating on her as well. So I did not know that he had been pop out 5 times. So, Cicely moved on. By then, she was acting. She had been in a Sounder. She had won a Golden Globe Award. And so she was doing well with her life. And even in 1976, she was introduced to the world as Jane Pittman. And so she was on on her career and on living her life, but they ran into each other again. And you know how it is when you run into an old flame and he's talking good to her. He says he's changing or willing to change. And she was a really healthy woman. She was a vegetarian. As you see, she was thin all of her life. And so she wanted him to get better. So she turned him on to herbs and living a more healthy life. And he actually kicked the white substance. He credited her for that. And she became his muse, and he started writing music again. So they were in this relationship and they decided to get married. They were married in November of 1981 after 15 years later of meeting each other and being kind of on and off at Bill Cosby's house. Hmm. What could go wrong? Andrew Young, the mayor of Atlanta, was the one who performed the ceremony. So as you can see, back then in New York and in Hollywood, the acting and entertainment people were really all right there together. And they came into the world and stepped on the stage as a power couple. They really looked good together. And she was really in love. And Miles, even though he really tried, I guess, he said in his memoir he treated on Cicely 5 days after they were married. So I don't know how hard he tried, but he had stopped using drugs for a little while. But the women, they never stopped. He kept cheating on Cicely, and he was secretly living with this woman. She was supposed to be teaching him how to paint. Her name was Gilbert, and he was living with her starting in 1985. So they had only been married for 4 years. And Cicely, here she was acting and performing and trying to help him kick the habit. And here he was cheating up a whole storm, living with this woman. And Cicely was tired of it. And I see this scene, and this is really to me where their life parallel, where they got into it. She finally stood up for herself after years of him cheating and abusing substances and alcohol. And look at these pictures. To me, it always seemed like she was kind of holding him up in some way. After all of that, she was tired, and she confronted him in 1987. And this is the same year they also were divorced. Now, she said when she confronted him, he was lying, she was tired, and she said, I am leaving. Well, he got in front of the door and he said, You're not going anywhere. And they got into a physical altercation. Cicely says in her memoir that she took his hair and she pulled him and spun him around, and a chunk of his hair came out of his head. Well, she wasn't bothered. She said she threw the hair to the ground. And the relationship was over. Threw the hair to it at its feet. And I don't blame her. I mean, from between the cheating and the substance abuse, she was tired and ready to move on with her life. And she did. Now, a few years after they broke up, he took ill. He had already been diagnosed with diabetes at 85, and he had already been sick from sickle cell. And with all of the substances and the drinking and the partying and the hard lifestyle, he was really sick. So much so that on September the 28th, 1991, he passed away from multi-organ failure. Now, Cicely lived another 30 years after him, passing on January the 28th, 2021, at 96 years old. She never remarried, she never had any other children, and she was buried next to Mr. Davis. So she loved him so much, even in her death. He was still her husband, and she was buried next to him. Now, she left too many accolades for me to count. She acted for almost 70 years, 7 decades of giving us her life on the stage, never showing a sign that she was dealing with what she was dealing with for 20 years with a man who never showed her the respect that she truly deserved. And then she stayed married to a man another 15 years early in her life who had left her 2 years after they had been married. So, I can you say she was lucky in love? You know, when you look at these pictures of her with her husband, Miles Davis, it seemed like she loved him completely and she wanted to see the best for him. So that was the story of Cicely Tyson and Miles Davis. Had you ever heard of them being married? I didn't even know they were married, much less all of the things that he took her through throughout the relationship. So I don't think it was as bad as Ike and Tina because he didn't. She took it one time. When they were fighting that day that I was talking about, where she pulled his hair, she said he hit her and hit her chest. And after that, he never did it again because she left. That was it. So she wasn't one to be pounded on for sure. So I hope that you enjoyed today's lecture. As always, my lectures are for entertainment and educational purposes only, and the Fair Act use is in effect. My sources were Cicely Tyson, performer, the Playbill Vault. I also read an article in the Broadway.com in the New York Amsterdam News. I also looked over both of their memoirs. So I thank you for joining me. Don't forget you all to like, share, and subscribe. I really greatly appreciate when you do that because it pushes it through the algorithm, the video, and other people get to learn about such interesting people. We have the most interesting people in our background, and I am honored to bring you the story of Cicely Tyson. Mal Davis did his thing too. He was a great trumpetist and he was a great jazz player, but he had problems and issues. And so I thank you all for joining me for another great episode of Royal, Black, and Elite. Now keep learning. I have other videos so you can learn about some of our other great people in history. Thanks for joining me.